Hello, everyone, and welcome for our second session of the day. I want to welcome Rowdy Rabouw for the stage. He is a front-end focused senior DevOps engineer. He has his own company named Double R Web Development. He has over 25 years of experience working in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, and currently Vue.js and Node.js, and is passionate about accessibility, which is a very important cause to make the world accessible for people with disability and make website accessible and enjoyable for people everywhere and for everyone. And I heard he loves watching superhero movies. I've recently watched Venom again with a close friend. And I wanted to ask you, Rowdy, what is your favorite superhero?
Well, it depends on days, but I go for
Captain America.
Captain America this time.
And if you can choose one special superpower, what will it be?
Oh, that's a very hard one, but I would say probably more strength. So like Hulkish, right?
Yeah.
Smash everything.
It's always good to have the superpower. So enjoy the session. If you have any question for Rowdy, keep it right on the chat. He will answer it later. And enjoy. Bye for now.
Thank you, Karen. Let me share my screen with you and saying good morning. So there we go. I want to talk about accessibility, like Karen said. And as an example, I would love to use some cats instead of people. This is our cat Oscar, also known as Ozzy, and unfortunately he died a year ago. But he was a one-eyed cat, and he had his disadvantages. Also, for instance, this is Vincent, who is a two-legged cat with titanium implants in his hind legs. Maybe you know Grumpy Cat as well. He had feline dwarfism. We have Monty, who's missing a nasal bridge. Probably know Little Bub as well if you are an animal lover. Also, like Grumpy Cat, he had feline dwarfism. Scooter is partially paralyzed, so they built a wheel for him. We have Mercury, called T-Rex as well, who is a two-legged cat. He probably lost his front legs from a weed whacker when people were trimming the grass when he was little. And for instance, Pico, who has glaucoma and is blind now. And I'm showing you this because if you're an animal lover, you probably will do anything to give these cats a beautiful life and help them wherever you can. We sure did for Oscar. So why don't we do this as well for humans, our fellow humans? As Karen said, my name is Rowdy. Currently, I'm a cat dad of 5. Here's the furry bunch. And yeah, I'm a front-end focused senior DevOps engineer with special attention for accessibility. Maybe next year there'll be another term there as well. So let's talk about accessibility. And usually it's written down as A11Y, Ellie also, because we're too lazy to write accessibility, and it's also way too difficult. It's a numeronym. You can also see it, for instance, for internationalization, I18N, or in the US, K9 for canine dogs. So if you see Ellie or A11I, then you know it's about accessibility. Accessibility guidelines are written down in WCAG, also known as WCAG. And essentially, it's a bunch of guidelines how to make your web content way more accessible. It's divided in 4 principles. The first one is perceivable. People must be able to find the content. It should be operable. People must be able to use your website. Well, that sounds normal, right? It should be understandable. So people at all levels of education, for instance, must be able to use your website, especially for government websites, is even more important. And it should be robust. Your website should work with all kinds of technologies and also with an eye on future technologies. So there are four principles. That it's the acronym is POUR. I think it's a poor acronym, but well, fine. It has 13 guidelines, and those 13 guidelines itself have together 78 success criteria. We're not going to do them all today, but I'm going to pinpoint a few that are really important and unfortunately not done well all the time. So first, let's look at robust. It should work on any modern browser and future browsers. Keep that in mind. And it could be on a desktop, on a laptop, your watch, maybe in your car, your fridge, I don't know. But keep in mind that it should be well enough to work anywhere. And a very important thing is it should work with screen readers. These are the three main ones: VoiceOver on Safari, with Safari on macOS, NVDA on Windows, and JAWS on Windows. VoiceOver is default available in macOS. NVDA is free to download for Windows, and JAWS, you need to pay a little bit money for it. And if we are talking about different technologies, well, look at this. These are examples of people that interact with the web in a different way than most people do. For instance, they use sip and puff, or they use head pointers or a mouse stick, or even if you don't have the controls for it, they use eye tracking to get things done. I don't know if you remember these technologies. If you use this, it's all gone now. From left to right, it's Java applets, it's the Real Player, it's Adobe Air, it's Silverlight, and it's Flash. It's not there anymore. But one thing is always there, and that's semantic HTML. You should always count on proper HTML. So for instance, if we look at headings, you have them from H1 till H6. And visually, it's like you see on the right-hand side. But if you're using a screen reader, you can pop up something called, in macOS, that is a rotor. And you can skip through all kinds of parts of the website. So in this case, I get the possibility to go through levels of headings with my screen reader. The most important thing is that you should only use one level 1 per page, because that's essentially the subject of that page. You should also don't skip any levels. So don't go from H1 to H3, for instance, because it doesn't make sense. Usually it's done because a designer says, well, it should be, I don't know, 40 pixels, and this should be 30 pixels. And then you think of, well, let's use a heading for that. Well, use the semantic heading, but use classes to make sure that they're in the proper size or color or something. We also have section elements since HTML5. Please use them, because in the rotor, people can navigate through these landmarks. So the header is called the banner, navigation is navigation, main is the same, aside is complementary, footer is content information. Well, if you look at the rotor now, at the landmarks, it's not that clear which navigation is what, right? Because we have 3 navigations. So you can use something called area label. I will come back at areas later on, but in this case, I add area label main, breadcrumbs, and secondary, and you immediately see it pop up in the landmarks there. Very useful for screen reader users. Let's talk about this thing. It looks like a button, right? But is it? Or is it just a link? Well, as many things in programming, it depends. Keep in mind that if you're going somewhere else to another page, please use a href. Please use a link. You can style it like a button, that's fine, but please make sure that it's a link. And if it's an action on the page itself, maybe kicking off some JavaScript, please use a button. Use the proper thing for the proper goal. So, what I've seen many times is people trying to reinvent the button. And if you want to do that, well, you start with this form, for instance, where we have a label and input for email. And then we have a div with a class of button to style it like a button. The amount of work you need to do to get this working is like this. First of all, the div needs to listen to a click event. So I'm adding an ID of submit button here, and I'm adding an event listener to it. All right. But then the form also needs to be submitted, right, to the server. So I need to add some functionality to get that form and submit it. It needs to be focusable. You want to be able to go there if you're tabbing through the page. I'm getting back to tabs in a later part of the talk, but you need to add tab index of 0 to make it a part of the normal flow of the tabs. Yeah, we need to make it accessible as well, because a div doesn't have any value for screen readers, for instance. So we add a role of button here. So the screen reader now knows, oh, this div is supposed to be a button. And then it needs to work with the keyboard as well. I want to be able to submit this form by hitting an enter or a space bar. So you need to incorporate it as well. There's quite some work, right, to just have a button. If you do it like this, sorry, this is the whole, if you do it like this, you just add a button. And you still can add that class of btn just to style it, that's fine. But you add a button, and it's the only button in the form. And because it's the only button in the form, it's immediately the submit button. So you don't even have to add type is submit. So please think before you're trying to reinvent stuff. Use stuff that's already there since the 90s. I said a little bit about ARIA, so let's dive deep into that now. It's a little bit weird. For me, ARIA means accessible rich internet applications. For me, it's more like attributes to HTML to make it more accessible, to make it more usable for screen readers. But at some point, it was called ARIA, so let's use that. I don't know if you've seen the film Fight Club, but the same rules apply to ARIA. Because the first rule of ARIA is not using ARIA. If you are able to use native HTML elements or attributes on those elements, please use that and don't go to ARIA, because it gives a lot of extra stuff in your code. And sometimes different screen readers don't interact the same way with these labels. The second rule is don't change native behavior. So as I mentioned, by reinventing the button, don't give a span, for instance, a role of button to create a button, but just use a button. The third rule is that if you create your own component, for instance, in React or Vue, please make sure it's also reachable by a keyboard. So it needs to have keyboard focus. And you can do that with tab index 0, for instance. If you're using -1 instead of 0, then you will remove that element from the natural tab order. So if you tap around the page, it will just be skipped. There could be reasons for that, because maybe you want to have JavaScript to interact with that component and not the user itself. But keep in mind, That's what happens if you're using -1. If you're using something larger than 0, you will essentially hijack the order. So now it will become first if it's the highest number that's being reached by a tab uh, instance. And the colors show it. 0 is fine, -1 in certain circumstances. Larger than 0, I wouldn't do that. The fourth rule is that all elements that are focusable and need to be focusable should not get a role of presentation or should have ARIA hidden true, because then it's not usable and accessible anymore. If you're tapping around that page, you will not be able to reach it. And we have a fifth rule. Make sure that all elements, all interactive elements, have a proper name. So in the first example, you have an input type of you have an input for search, but a screen reader doesn't know what's this about, doesn't know what search does here, this input. It will just say input type or input box or something. So if you add an ARIA label of search, then a screen reader knows, hey, this input is for searching. So you will announce that properly. And the last one is even better. Make sure you have a label for it, and then it's connected immediately. And you don't have to add that ARIA. As I mentioned, rather use native HTML than ARIA. So the last one is even better. Also, what you see a lot on websites is links like read more. Yeah. Well, the first one is horrible because read more of what? The second one, if you add an ARIA label, then it's announced by the screen reader again. It won't say read more, it would say read more about famous cats. But again, you're using an ARIA label. And the first rule is don't use ARIA. So even better is to add some span, add a span around about famous cats. So the screen reader will read more about famous cats again. And you see I added a class here of SR only, screen reader only. And that's usually something like this. So that part of the string of the link will be visually hidden. So if you have clear vision, you don't see it. But a screen reader will, and also search engines will. So that makes it even more interesting for SEO as well. If you're building, for instance, a single page application with React or Vue or Angular or whatever, you usually do a lot of stuff inside of that page and don't move to another page, for instance, like a more plain normal website. What you want to do then is make sure that the user knows that something has changed. The only thing we can use for this is ARIA Live. And there are two versions, polite and assertive. Polite will wait until everything is, announced by the screen reader. If you're reading, for instance, a paragraph, then it will wait until that's finished. And you have assertive that will just interrupt and immediately announce what's there. So I have a little example here. And you also get a feeling of how VoiceOver sounds on macOS. Let's see about it.
VoiceOver on Safari. Status message. Heading level 1. Refuse to drink water except out of someone's glass. Main. You are currently on heading level 1. Human. Content selected. Edit text. You are currently on a text field. To enter text in this field, type search button. You are currently on a button. To click this button, press Control, Option, Space. Meow whenever a door is opened. Russian book. Search results. 2 items found. 1. Young, lick human with sandpaper tongue. 2. Wake up human for food at 4 a.m.
Well, if you have cats, you're probably familiar with things like this. But what you could hear is like, okay, it started reading the paragraph, and then I I hit search, and after that, search will run, and it will find the search results, and then immediately interrupts itself actually, and saying what's found. In ARIA, there are a lot of role states and properties. You see here all kinds of roles. Again, if you can avoid using it, avoid it. Use native HTML elements, and also a lot of ARIA properties here. And I'm going to point out 3 that are mostly used. And that's, as I already showed you, ARIA label. And what ARIA label does is it will override the element's name itself, replacing it with what you specify. So if you are a screen reader user and you see this, well, you don't see this button, but this button is announced, it will sound like this.
Times button.
Times button, that doesn't say a lot, right? That's not useful. So if you don't want to put close in the button as the text for users that can see the button as well, you could add the ARIA label. And in this case, ARIA label close. And it will sound like this.
Close button.
Close button. That's way more useful, right? Another one that's frequently used is ARIA labeled by. And it will again override the element's name, but will not replace it with what you write down, what you decide to do, but it will replace it with the contents of another element. So in this case, the section itself is labeled by the ID of cat's heading, and that's the H2 there, famous internet cats. And what this will do is that if a user gets the rotor working, it can go to the landmarks and will actually hear what's going on there.
Landmarks menu. Famous internet cats region.
So it will now announce this section as the famous internet cats region. Very helpful for the user to skip through all the landmarks on the page. And the last thing I want to show you is ARIA described by. And that's not really overriding stuff, but it's more like adding extra to it. So to make it more clear. Because if you're a screen reader user, normally the label will be announced like, okay, enter a username here, username for the input. But the rules of that username, so the username must be 6 to 15 characters or may only contain alphanumeric characters, you have no idea that's there. So it will sound like this.
Username, edit text with autofill menu.
But you have no idea how that username should look. So we can use ARIA described by. And now you can see I just link those 2 paragraphs by the ID in ARIA described by, and it will sound like this.
Username, edit text with autofill menu. Username must be 6 to 15 characters. Username may contain alphanumeric characters.
And the beauty of it will pause a little bit about after announcing the username input, and then it will announce what's special about it. So keep that in mind as well. We have something called the accessibility tree, and that determines what kind of name things get. If you look at this example, we have an H1 with an ARIA label, an ARIA labeled by, and an ARIA described by. It might be hard to see what the end result will be. Well, let's listen.
Heading level 1, H1 with ARIA labeled B. H1 with ARIA described B.
So what you can see happening is there, if you go to the DevTools, for instance, in Chrome or Firefox or whatever browser you like, you go to the accessibility tab, and you can see here the name is H1 with ARIA labeled by. So ARIA labeled by will override ARIA label, which overrides element in this case, what's in the H1 itself. But the described by, as I mentioned earlier, is added. So that's the whole thing is then announced. All right, let's move to perceivable. People must be able to find your content. Color is a nice thing. You should not rely solely on color to make things clear, because we have people with daltonism, color blindness. So if I have this input for an email, yeah, I might suffer from deuteranopia or monochromacy. And then I have no idea, especially on the right-hand side, it's all gray. Left-hand side is a little bit brown, orange-ish. I have no idea what's going on here. Is this good? Is this bad? What is it? Well, one thing to solve this is the use of icons. It's more clear now what's going on. So the top ones are wrong and the bottom one is apparently correct. Another thing that's really annoying for users and also for me getting older is the color contrast. We have designers that make beautiful things with beautiful details and nice colors, but the contrast should be good enough to be able to read it, right? That's the main purpose we have with the application or a website. It shows that the Web 1 Million, a project that investigates the top 1 million websites, homepages actually, that almost 84% has low contrast issues. So we have work to do there, people. What is a contrast ratio? Well, it goes from 1 to 21. And usually you see it like 1:1 and 21:1, if you look in DevTools, for instance. The thing is, normal text should have a minimum ratio of 4.5, and large text or normal text that's bold should have a ratio of 3. Well, how is this calculated? It's pretty simple at first. If you look at this calculation, it's the relative luminance of the lighter of the two colors and the relative luminance of the darker of the colors. Well, how do you get the relative luminance? It's the brightness of a color from 0, the darkest, to 1, the lightest. But then you have to do calculations like this, and then I'm lost. So you probably don't want to do this yourself. There are a lot of color contrast checkers out there. It could be browser plugins, it could be separate applications. And in this case, I'm using the Chrome DevTools. As you can see, it has an accessibility part if you inspect it. And this one has a contrast of 3.63, which is good. Well, let's look at this website. I have to say it's my employer's, but I removed the logo. But yeah, this needs some help. You can see here the contrast is good, but if we go look at it a little bit further, here this is still fine. The dark orange, the medium orange is still good, but then the light orange is already too light, so that doesn't help. Let's look at buttons. Yeah, white on orange, not a good idea. And also the other way around, same problem. It's not, doesn't have enough contrast. And also this, dark gray on light gray. No, don't do that. Same here, still too little. And if you go down to the footer, then it's fine again, because it's a little bit darker gray on light gray. I know we have a lot of work to do here, and we will. Also, things to consider for contrast ratio is be careful with text shadows. Be careful with text outlines as well. And what about text on background images? One thing you shouldn't do is force a user to use a certain type of orientation, so either portrait or landscape. I've seen code like this. And what this does, if you're holding your device, for instance, I don't know, your tablet in a landscape mode, it will show the message, please rotate your device. So this website is only visible when you're using it in portrait mode. Why? Because the designer likes it? Well, make sure you create responsive websites for that. And it looks fine in any way you look at it. Also, this is even worse. If you're holding a device in portrait mode, so how you usually hold your phone, it will rotate the text 90 degrees. So you either have to look at it like this or have to rotate your device. Not a good one as well. Please don't do this. The thing that's often forgotten is alternative text for images. On the web, 1,000,000, it's more than 50%, way more. So if you look at this image, yeah, as a sighted user, I can see this image, and I can see it's a cat with a paper bag on his head. But as a screen reader user, I get this.
MG 9370-1 JPG image.
Yeah, thank you. I have no idea what it is. So for this, you just add an alt attribute. It's been there for many, many years, and use it. And don't have that alt tag, that alt text just be cat, for instance, but just describe what's in the scene. There is no limit on the text you can show here, and it makes it for a blind user, a screen reader user, way more interesting on what's on that image, and it can create a picture in his own mind. So let's listen.
A red cat lying on the kitchen counter with a brown bag over his head. The bag has holes for the eyes and snout and make the cat look like a bank robber image.
Way better, right? On the other hand, if you have an image like this that's been used as a background image, this is fine. You still need to use the alt attribute, but leave it blank. And then it won't be announced by screen readers because it's only decorative and you don't need to have a screen reader announce that. Even better maybe is just use it as a background image in CSS. Then you don't have to do anything else with alt, and you can scale it like whatever you want. The next thing is it should be operable. People must be able to use your website. One of the things is focus indicator, and that's an indicator that shows you where you are at the page if you're tapping around. So if I use this default example in Chrome on Mac, I just tap around here. And I can clearly see where I am. I'm now in a link. I'm going to the radio buttons, input, and the button. Great. I have exactly the idea where I am at that point. However, many designers and developers find it really ugly. It doesn't fit the brand or something. So they do things like this. They remove the focus outline. And if I tap around now, I don't see anything except, whoa, we're in the input here. Now I have an idea where I am, but on the other parts, I have no clue. You can make it more beautiful, like things like this, if that fits your brand or your style or whatever. So you can override the defaults from the browser. And if you want to do that, so you can really set the focus outline to 0, but with consequences, you have to do everything yourself. So that's what I did in this example, for instance. but please don't remove it and have no alternative for it. The tabbing order is also very important. I already mentioned some things about that, but if we look at this example of Dutch news page, and on the left bottom there you can see the link and see what happens if I tap around. It's already a little bit hard to see that I'm in the menu on top. I'm now in tech, media and culture. Go to the shop now, and then I go to more, and then it's gone. Well, let's hit the enter. Oh, there's a sub menu there. But if I'm tapping around now, I can see soccer, Formula One, all the sports games, and now I'm just getting inside of this menu. So I was tapping behind this drop-down menu, and that's not really useful. So there's a better way of doing that, and I have an example of it here. This is it without any JavaScript, so it's always open. But if you tap around, it just follows the flow, right? Great. This is the one with JavaScript. I can tap to the next one, and the last one, hit enter, tap again, going through things, going back here, enter, tap, and it follows the natural way of it. And I can hit escape to close it all. The slides will be available afterwards, of course, but this is a little bit of the code behind it. It's a navigation enough, and within there we have an unordered list with list items. And if it has a submenu, it's an unordered list with list items as well. So we give it an ARIA label of main, so it will be announced as main navigation. And we set in this case, the area current to page, because that's the page we are on. So that's also an area label you can use, an area attribute you can use, area current, to indicate where you are at that point. Has pop-up is true, so we indicate that you can open a menu here, and area expanded is false because it's still closed. And I'm using the class here to set things up. So reset menu is actually closing everything down and setting the attributes to false, for instance, for the area expanded, and hide all the unordered lists that are in there. But if I click on a link on the top menu, then I will switch things around. I will switch the class name, so if I get an open menu, then I can make sure it opens, and I set the area expanded to true as well. And then I'll toggle the hidden class so it's shown. And at the end, I have an event listener to the key down for escape to reset everything again, to close everything. So also very important is if you have a lot of stuff on your page, you want the user to be able to skip things. So add a skip to main content, for instance, and you can skip over all the menu and the search and go to the content immediately. And actually, it's just a link pointing to an ID. And the way I did it was, well, I made sure it was out of the browser, out of sight first, and then get it when it gets focus, we're moving it back to the page. Last things about understandable, people must be able to understand. Forms is a thing, missing input labels, about 46%. Don't use a placeholder as a label. Use a real label. Also, the placeholder attribute, it's kind of hard to read, and it's hard to remember if you're typing into it, but so maybe do something like this. Make sure it's understandable. We like to build custom radios as well, right? Well, do it in the proper way. In this case, if I would not hide the emoji, on different systems, it would be differently announced. So what I did, I hide the emojis for screen readers, and I hide the text uh, for the browser itself. And then I put some CSS there as well. And the most important thing is that I hide the input radio itself by setting the opacity and the width to 0. And it will sound like this.
Happy, selected, radio button, 1 of 3. Angry, selected, radio button, 2 of 3. Sad, selected, radio button, 3 of 3.
And that's what we want, right? Something about input types, use them, especially for mobile devices. So use email so they get the right things. Input type number is a hard one because it's very inconsistent. Keyboard is not that great, and those confusing arrows as well. So you could use input type telephone for that. If you're using error messages, please don't say things like this. Please enter a valid one, because what is a valid one? This is better. Please only enter digits. Even better is just remove those non-digits yourself. HTML5 form validation is really, it's good, but it looks ugly. It's different in every browser. So you don't want to rely on that. What's better is things like this.
There are 3 errors found in the information you submitted. 1. Name is required. 2. Country can only contain letters. 3. Email format is incorrect.
So that makes way more sense than those inline messages. I have code to do this, but since we want to share some time for questions as well, I'm going to skip those, but you will get them in the slides as well, because it's using the constraint validation API. You can still use the things that HTML5 offers you, but you do it yourself. Legibility is also very important for people that have, for instance, minimal education, dyslexia, or just have some intellectual disabilities, some challenges there. So please don't use difficult words or metaphors, especially if people don't have the same native language. Then it's hard for them. Keep the sentences short, use positive sentences and active language as well, and use a font that's easy to read. You know, this font is pretty hard to read, and don't put it too close together as well. I'm definitely running out of time, so the language attribute I'm going to skip as well and go way to the end for, sorry about that, with this slide for my friend Peter, who says, when it comes to accessibility, I rather see imperfect than indifferent, and I agree with him. Make baby steps, make the web a little better place, just one code change at a time. So thank you. We're going to Q&A, and the slides are available at rowdy.coach/devdays.
Thank you very much, Rowdy, for such an important session. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. We have 2 questions in the Q&A. Is one H1 per page still relevant in 2022, or could it be one H1 per section?
There are different opinions about that. It depends. Yeah, it's for what I know, it's still the best to only have one H1, because it's the main subject of that page you're on. So I wouldn't use more H1s in sections or other landmarks myself.
And do you have a cheat sheet on accessibility or area that you can suggest?
Yeah, I don't know it by heart now, but I will place it in the Q&A later on. There's definitely good cheat sheets. Yeah.
Great. So thank you everyone for joining the session and for asking questions and being active participant. Thank you, Rowdy, for an excellent talk. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.